Welcome to the Transforming Trauma Podcast, a complex trauma podcast through the NARM Training Institute. My name is Sarah Buino, and I'm so excited to be sharing today's interview with you. Hey, Transforming Trauma listeners. Please join us starting in June for our online NARM training in learning how to transform trauma. This online NARM basics training is available for professionals working with clients or populations dealing with complex trauma. Now more than ever before, it's essential that we learn how to resolve complex trauma and support post-traumatic growth. NARM provides a relational approach to addressing the current COVID pandemic and tools to support healing in the aftermath of this collective trauma. If you're looking for more advanced training in complex trauma and are working in mental health, healthcare, education, substance abuse recovery, or allied fields, join us for this Level 1 NARM training to become a NARM-informed professional. For more information and to apply, please visit at www.narmtraining.com/online-basics. Hi, thanks for joining us for today's episode. Today's guest is Giancarlo Simpson, and he and I recorded our original conversation a couple months ago, and we wanted to bring him back to talk about what's happening currently in June of 2020 with the protests in response to George Floyd's murder. So let me introduce you to Giancarlo. Giancarlo Simpson is a mental health professional currently working with couples, families, and young boys in urban communities. He sees the family as an emotional system where individuals learn to quote-unquote survive and function within it. He is an advocate for marginalized groups and is dedicated to educating both in the classroom and in the therapy room. So please enjoy my conversation with Giancarlo. Hi, Giancarlo. Welcome.
How you doing? Thanks for having me.
I'm doing. Yeah. Thanks for coming back. So just to frame for listeners, we recorded your episode a while back. And since current events are so timely right now, we wanted to essentially get an update from you in reference to everything that's going on right now. So I kind of want to just give you the floor and let you take off.
So it's hard for me to really process my emotions and my feelings, but I've also been telling myself for the past few weeks to just give myself permission to just feel whatever the hell it is that I'm feeling. Not going to take a time to be introspective, not going to take this time to look in with myself, none of that stuff. I'm just going to let myself absorb what's going on and feel. And in that process, I've been connecting with people and connecting in spaces to allow me to just vent and let these feelings out. And then, I'm using that as an opportunity for people to give me feedback or support or what have you. So I'm just letting it go, letting myself go emotionally. And a lot of us are right now, which is good. So one of the things I've noticed that I think I probably just want to touch on is just the idea of like Black anger or Black rage, and normalizing in the same way as our white counterparts. And I think it's important for us to look at it from, let's say, if we look at it from the perspective of NARM, one of the things that always stands out to me was one of the definitions of anger, which was that it's a protest of our needs, or basically saying that our needs are not being met, right? And the needs that are not being met are now going to be expressed through forms of anger or frustration. When we think about it in this way, as Black people, we have experienced centuries of oppression, violence, and ways that have dehumanized us. And for us to hold in this feeling while still trying to maintain is a lot. And not only to hold in this feeling, but just to also try to function and still be aware that I'm still trying to function in a society that is constantly oppressing me is extremely taxing and tiring. And now what we're seeing again is this anger, frustration, and rage finally showing up in many different forms. And I want people to understand that these forms are not necessarily in forms of like physical violence, but necessarily verbal. It comes off in ways that is not what the media or what the perception of anger is. And what I say is when we think about protesting, right? When we think about Blacks choosing or Black people choosing to not speak on matters anymore, choosing to use their voice in many different ways, it's often taken as anger by others, right? So when you think about the angry Black man, the angry Black woman, this was a conversation I was having before. One of the questions I asked was, well, what defines being an angry Black woman, an angry Black man? And the feedback I got was, at its core, it was voicing an opinion, exercising their voice or their right to speak up for something, that is now taken as anger. And I felt like I was very gaslighting because you're making us feel bad for feeling. And that's part of where this anger is coming from. It's like you're taking away these natural emotions that we have as people, not validating for the root cause of it and making us feel bad for even having it. So when I say about anger and how it shows up, and for us to understand that, we also have to understand the root reasons why this anger is occurring. A lot of times what happens is we look at the behavior, the outbursts, the outcries, and all these things, and again, contribute to the problem by minimizing the reasons why we feel the way that we do, why we're hurt and why we're upset, what we're lacking and what we're not, the things that we're not receiving at the most basic human level. So yeah, I just wanted to really open up about that. I think that kind of feeds into some of the narratives that's being pushed out now, is to create this perception that how we're expressing ourselves and what we're expressing ourselves about or for is problematic, when in reality that's not the case at all.
Right. And to talk about what is an angry Black man, what is an angry Black woman, I think part of it too, if we look at it from a relational perspective, the white person feels threatened. Why do they feel threatened? Because it threatens to take away some power.
Exactly.
Because of the systems that have been created, it's implicit. And until white people begin to really look, like you said, at the root cause and the history of all of this, it has been very easy to dismiss and to not count as valid. And NARM really holds that. A lot of times in grad school, we've been taught that anger is a secondary emotion, but NARM really talks about it as it can be primary, and
Right.
to experience that anger and to allow it to be with it. Like you said at the beginning, I'm just going to be with my emotions right now. I'm not going to do anything but be with them. That's so aligned with NARM, everything that you said.
Yeah. And that's the other part I wanted to touch on, was the reality of this white fragility, right? And us expressing ourselves and recognizing that the reason why there is this implicit and this unconscious pushback towards what we are doing, and it's not just us as Black people, but also even our allies, that what we're doing, what we're talking about, is that a lot of people's identity is also rooted in power. So what we are doing and what we are expressing is we're sharing our voice against a system that has continually put one group of people above another. And in that process, that group of people have created an identity of themselves that is felt to be superior. And there are many different systems that reinforce that. So what we're doing now is challenging all the systems that reinforce that identity of power. And there is a natural fear of what would the white person be left with if power was taken away or power is given to others. And it's a
Right.
very threatening thing. So you see how these systems work. You see how this unconscious implicit bias works. You see how it seems like this willful ignorance works when it comes to looking at these situations, which makes it even more frustrating, because I can understand that you're doing the best you can to avoid this conversation or avoid acknowledging the things for what it is, because it will mean something to you in a way that you're just
Hmm.
not ready for yet. You don't want to identify that there are certain things that you are essentially prejudiced or racist about. Jane Elliott talks about it. There's a book called White Fragility that really breaks it down as well.
Yes.
We think of racism in itself as like you're either KKK or a neo-Nazi, but you don't talk
Right.
about the woman that holds her purse when a Black person walks by, or the microaggressions when someone assumes you're a basketball player because you're 6 foot. So we have to really explore the spectrum of that dynamic of that. And some people are very uncomfortable because they don't want to be labeled or put into the box they think exists.
Right. And I'm glad you brought up the book White Fragility too. It helps people understand that like racism is a system and there are individual acts of racism. But if we continue to look just at the individual acts, that's when we're missing the big picture. And then we
Right.
can't own for ourselves what our participation in that is. Yeah.
Right.
Was there anything else that you want to make sure that listeners know right now in this time?
Man. I would say do the best you can to check in on a Black person or person of color today. Give them space if necessary. Check in on an ally as well, because they're getting it too. And also take this time to be very introspective if you choose to. And I say choose to because some people are going to choose not to. And that in itself
Right.
is its own conversation. Why am I choosing not to sit with myself and sit with these experiences and address an issue that I either might be a part of directly or indirectly. Why am I not having this
Right.
conversation with myself? And what does that mean for me? And for those that are willing to have that conversation, go there, be vulnerable, address it for what it is, and work to be anti-racist. There are a lot of resources available for that now. There's manuals for that, workbooks, there's readings. I encourage for everyone to do their due diligence to learn on their own as well as learning with others. But don't put the pressure of being taught about racism on a Black person or person of color. I
Yeah.
think that has been something we have been doing in many different ways as far as educating and showing and teaching for years and centuries. And I think it's now the time for those who want to be allies or who are teeter-totting or whatever it is to do the work on their own as well.
Yeah, and I really hope to post some of those resources that you were talking about because there's a lot of stuff coming out, especially specifically for therapists. There's
Yeah.
one course, Decolonizing Therapy for Black People, that I just signed up for. I'm trying to get my staff to sign up for too. There's just so many good things out there.
Yeah, there's actually a couple. I had a colleague that sent me one this morning. I signed up for. It's a free course. It's about our struggles are intertwined in the sections of mental health and oppression. I forgot the name of the place, but just look up that title and it should pop up. But it's a free course. I think it's self-paced. So there's tons of resources. There's a couple anti-racist like manuals and guides that I do have that I'll be happy to share with you as well. But
Mhm.
it's sad that it had to come to, well, I can't say it's sad it had to come to this because I could have said that a month ago regarding other incidents that occurred. So I mean, or God knows, to be honest with you, the way things are, that's not recorded. It could be on a daily basis. I could have been giving you a speech. I'm sorry, I had to come to this.
Mhm.
Yeah, man, it's just a lot. I really think it's important for us to really address our internal biases, call it out for what it is, and ask ourselves at that point: do we care to actually be better, or do we care to stay the same?
I think that's a perfect place to end. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and what's happening for you right now.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate that.
I appreciate Giancarlo for taking the time to be with me again today. Now we'll share with you our original conversation. Well, we really like to start off these interviews the same way we would start off a NARM session. So the first question is, what would you like listeners to get out of our interview today?
Well, there's a lot, but I think a couple of things I would like for listeners to get out of this interview today is a conversation about like mental health in communities of color and Black communities and low-income communities as well. And also just this conversation of like vulnerability. I think that's just very important because it ties into to NARM in itself and exploring like the things that prevent us from getting what we want. And sometimes it usually has to deal with being vulnerable and taking that first step. So I think will be some good things for us to talk about today.
I think so. So how about telling us a little bit more about you and where you work?
So I am a therapist. I do practice out of CMC Therapy in Davie and also the Healing Arts Institute in Oakland Park. And I see clients both locations. I am also a instructor at Lynn University full-time. I teach the Dialogues of Self and Society course, which is a course that combines psychology and sociology together and kind of puts it back on the student to kind of relate it to their life and their experiences. So we add like certain theories like how Maslow's law relates to your life or to your experiences, or how like Bronfenbrenner's theory relates to you, and try to give them an idea about how these concepts are like everyday things. Like they can start mapping out like, okay, I see, stage one of developmental theory in play in my kids or my niece or nephew. You know what I mean? So it's a really cool class. It's a fairly easy class, I think. It's super introductory. I also teach a counseling class, which is probably like, low-key my favorite, because we just talk about like different therapy approaches, the limitations in therapy, experiences with clients that I have. So it gives them an idea about what to prepare for. But the energy is just a little different in that room when we start talking about like therapy stuff. I don't know. I really like it a lot. I babysit a 100 level class.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Well, it's one of those like first year classes that go over like introduction to the institution itself. So, teaching about like financial aid stuff and that type of thing. So I joke about that one. But yeah, those are the classes I teach. And I also am a program director at this mentoring program called the Rites of Passage. And this program works with middle school kids in Pompano and Hollywood, Florida, primarily young Black boys, kids of color in lower income communities. And that is an experience. It really is an experience. It's one that I really welcome. It's one that I'm very thankful to be a part of. I was with Family First before I moved over to this program, and my experience at Family First was amazing. It was very hard to kind of move from that space to the space I'm at now on a personal level, but I also knew that my purpose was needed in these communities. That was really just my personal draw, and I made that sacrifice and that step to work for the Rites of Passage program. And honestly, I'm very thankful for that. I think kids really need to see people that look like them doing stuff. Mm-hmm. So I joke about this a lot to myself, but I really, really appreciate my experiences with them because there's a different level of authenticity and like care that you have, and like how they receive who you are as a person is like really impactful. Even just how you conduct yourself, because even that's different from what they've mostly seen, especially for some of my young boys who don't have fathers in their lives or father figures. We play that role for them, and we do the best we can to model like, not even like the stereotypical man, but just like this idea of being a very well-sounded and emotionally intelligent human being.
Yeah. I was really interested in hearing you juxtaposing these two essentially populations that you work with, right? Privileged college students and then underprivileged youth, right?
Yeah.
So I guess the big question is, tell us about that. So whatever you want to say about that, and then weaving in where you're seeing complex trauma and how you're working with that. So that's not even a question. It's just a statement. I have a feeling you're fine with that.
First off, this is not like shade. I think this is, I just need to put that in context as a disclaimer. But I do think it's a real experience that a lot of educators have in the school system when it comes to just working with students as a whole. Mm-hmm. And this is a call to parents right now, as I say this too. A lot of the behaviors that these kids bring into the classroom is a huge indicator of some of the things that are going on at home. And a lot of parents come into school surprised about the things that these kids are saying and doing, which makes no sense to me because they've got to be learning it from somewhere and got to be reinforced in these behaviors from somewhere. So with that said, like I worked at Miramar High School, which is in Miramar, Florida. And that area in itself, you know, has its challenges. You're going to hear about it on the news every now and then. But it was also a great school. It had a great program. So you have a mixed batch of students that are in the IB program, the AP program, and so forth. So it was cool to see a lot of kids, a very diverse group of kids getting an education and being really like committed to it and like really into it, like competitively into it. A little too much too. I'd be like, well, guys, the grade's not that important. You need to actually learn this stuff. Mm-hmm. But also learning about the things that were going on in their lives on the back end and seeing that they were able to put themselves in a position to go to these really good schools despite so many limitations at home and in their own personal experiences. And that was always encouraging to me because when I got into teaching at the institution at the university I'm at, I actually have a couple of my students from Miramar that are there. They actually went. Oh, cool. When they found out they found out I was teaching there and they were like, yo, you know, of course. I'm coming. Yeah. Yep. Which I thought was pretty cool. At the same time, I'm also noticing like the differences in terms of people's experiences there. So I actually teach at the school I went to and got my master's at. And cool. It's an obvious thing where you notice that kids are driving in like, I don't even know the type of Audi it is, but it's a super dope Audi. I don't know if it's an R8 or what, real fancy. But just looking at the culture there and seeing like, you know, man, when it comes to like social economic status wise, like I'm not really one of you guys. But not even just that on the education level, it's one of those things where we have students across the board that either are really committed to the work and not. And that's not to say that that's not the case. But what I have noticed, though, when it comes to a student's approach to the learning experience and applying it to their lives, I've noticed to be a little difficult for them to apply like things that they're not used to, such as like, all right, man, conversations about race, gender, economic inequality. What does it mean for these microaggressions? You know what I mean? Like, you don't even really know what it is. I had a kid that apologized to me after class, after we explained what it was. And he was like, yo, I just want to apologize. I realized like I made a comment to you, assuming that you were this person, this type of person. And I was like, look, bro, I was like, first off, the fact you came up to me after class and acknowledged that you learned this and that you're able to apply it to me is huge. Huge. But you have a lot of students that don't do that. And oftentimes what I notice that they don't do that is that they don't care. You know, there's just sometimes I wear it as a lack of empathy when it comes to just connecting experiences that aren't your own. And
can I interrupt there just because I want to open this up just a little bit more because I'm absolutely 100% sure some of them don't care. I'm curious how many of them, it's just shame.
Yeah.
right? Something that I've been learning about recently is internalized racial superiority for white people and how that manifests as perfectionism. And if you tell me, a perfectionist white person, that I'm not doing it right, shame is just going to shut me down immediately. And that's a complex trauma response.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think people need to realize how we define complex trauma is very different for different people. I think for me, my definition of it in itself, and I was rattling my head with it for a few days. And I had a really nice one that sounded really cool in my head, and I lost it. But I think my most genuine way of saying it is that when we think about complex trauma, it's these experiences that we've had either in our early childhood that has limited us in understanding ourselves effectively, which has now impacted how we understand ourselves as young adults, right?
I love that.
Oh, it sounded good? Cool.
Yeah, I'm into it. Yes.
So how I see that, though, is when we think about like white fragility, right?
Yes.
Having this conversation about like this, the idea of the perfectionist white person. And then now you're presenting things to them that are either new to them or that go against what they've grew up learning, right? Then it's going to throw off their whole sense of identity.
Exactly.
So of course I'm going to shut down. The best thing for me to do to keep a sane sense of who I am right now is to not talk. Because if I talk, that leaves me open for you to come at me and start dropping more things out here that I don't like to hear.
Yep.
So I'm either going to shut down, end the conversation, respond with anger and frustration to really kind of push you away. I will do the things I can in order to kind of like, quote unquote, survive like this experience that I have right now. And I think when we think about like survival patterns, it's basically anything that we do to maintain like a sense of like balance and homeostasis for ourselves, like what's normal and what's comfortable for us.
Right.
That's why I push the idea of these conversations, because in order for us to really change as a culture, a society, or even as selves, we have to really be comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yep. Mic drop. Nothing else to say there. So in terms of the youth that you're working with right now, what are you seeing in terms of complex trauma? What's coming up for them? How are you working with that?
First off, man, these kids are resilient. So I say that, but I also have to highlight the fact that I have kids that's parents or fathers have completely disowned them, to the point where I called a father for a son and straight up told me that I don't have a son. And I actually thought I messed up on the kid's phone number. And I was like, hey, man, I just want to let you know, I think I called your dad the other day about like, having to go to practice. And I'm pretty sure this is your dad. But Buddy told me that, he doesn't have a son. He was like, he doesn't. That's my dad, though. And I just sat there and we just stared at each other. And that was the conversation. It was like, you know what? I get what you're saying. I don't even have to dig any deeper. We don't have to really dive into it. I get it. So those are some of the experiences I have. Others include the good old stereotype of we don't talk about our business. So I have kids that have ADHD that, that parents have waited until things hit the fan to actually look into diagnosing and medicating them just because they're worried about the stigma behind that. And in that sense, it is a limitation to the idea of understanding more about yourself, right? And as we say complex trauma, I'm also going to talk about like things that prevent us from being comfortable with being who we are.
Yes.
And falling into this stereotype or this fear, the stereotype of like Black people or people of color do not, do therapy, or mental health is not a thing, or, all that stuff. It also impacts us in the classroom, because now when I'm shadowing the kid and I'm seeing this kid get yelled at, and I'm sitting here and I completely understand what's going on with the kid in terms of his like emotional processes. I'm just looking at the teacher like, yo, you need to tone down. And they just can't connect that to the student, right? And I think about how that always makes my guy feel when we walk out and we talk together, and he's just stressed out and frustrated because he's not getting the type of attention that he should be getting with some of his experiences, because they're not attending to those personal needs that he's showing. So those are other ways it manifests. Other ways include, financial limitations in parents. Like there are just a lot of things that go on in the household where they can't afford certain things. And so you have kids that are wearing the same clothes throughout the whole week. It's tough. That's why. So the reason why I wanted to say at the beginning of all of this that they're very resilient is that they still show up to school. Whether school for them is an opportunity for education or not, they're still showing up. Even if they show up and skip their classes, I take a win that they're at least in school and not on the streets doing something else.
Well, and this is kind of what I was talking about earlier before we started the recording, the limits of our educational system in terms of connecting with communities of color. If you had a magic wand and could change our education system, what would you do? How would it be better?
Oh, shoot, this could be its own podcast.
Don't get me started. Okay.
I think so. Okay. So one of the things I definitely want to emphasize is that teachers got to be compensated more. Like, oh my gosh. If you really want to, I don't even know how to really explain it. Like, it's common sense.
Right.
Teachers need to be compensated more for the work that they're doing, because they're doing way more than what they're asked of. They are not just educators, but for some people, they are the role models, the mentors, the guides, the advocates. They're the ones that's probably looking up resources to help families out. You know what I mean? And then you see these teachers that are burnt out, and you completely understand why. And we're losing good teachers because of that. We don't have enough support financially. A lot of these lower income like communities in itself, there's not enough money pushed in to help that. Like, we don't have laptops, you know what I mean? Like, we're not given like the basic things to make the school and the students feel like they are a part of something bigger, or that they're able to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak, because they're looking around at their peers or some people that they know of. They're going to different schools and they have all these resources available so they can have this educational experience, and they're stuck here using broken laptops because they're not getting money for it from the school system. You know what I mean? Like, those things play a huge part in the culture of an environment and like the mindset that you now bring into that environment. Right.
And because so what does it say about me that this is what I'm being given?
Right. Because now you're like, holy crap. I had the kid that was leaving, that was 8th grade. And I still keep in touch with him to this day. He was like, dog, I'm not trying to go to this high school. He's like, I'm aware about where I'm at. And I know the type of environment I'll be around. I just don't want to get caught up in that and get distracted. But I cannot afford to go to the school that I want to go to play football. I just can't afford it. And there it goes right there. So, you know, luckily he's a very strong-willed person, but that's the reality for a lot of kids. It's like, they know there's some areas or some places that they, school-wise, they don't want to go to because of the environment. But unfortunately, now they're stuck in that environment. They have to learn to survive in that environment. So you have, you know, when you see all these stories about all these good kids with great behavior, you know, so much promise, quote unquote, but then they get roped up in certain things, you don't realize the underlying stories behind that. And I think people overlook that part and just start labeling kids as being like these deviant kids that are just always problematic. But I'm like, nah, man, I guarantee you, if you give these kids the same resources as someone else in a private school, I guarantee you that they'll probably have the same outcome or something similar.
And in order to get there too, I haven't done enough research on how trauma-informed schools work, but I've heard that there are specific trauma-informed schools that can better support these students to getting to the point where then they can achieve in school, right? Kind of creating a bridge.
Yeah, so there are a couple of schools out there. There's one I know in particular that I've referred a couple of students to. Again, that part of it too is that the process of getting into those schools, it's very long. But the program itself is amazing to me. I think honestly, one of the things that we can do with changing the school system is by incorporating more like behavior modification stuff.
Right.
Life skills stuff, like legitimately just sitting down, like teaching you how to be a functional human being.
Yes.
Because at this point, I still don't know how to use a box and whiskers plot for my everyday purposes. I don't use it. Exactly. We learned, you don't remember that in back like elementary school or high school, like using a box and whiskers plot? Oh my gosh. This must be Maryland school system. All right. So I take it back. Jeez. But yeah, like some of these like things that obviously is good to know for the sake of just having like knowledge, but in terms of like applying it to like life.
Yeah.
I haven't looked back at my stats book and said like, man, I needed all of this. But what I'm saying is that we need to look at incorporating an environment where we really, man, I hate to sound like a super nerd, but like psychoeducational stuff, man.
Yeah.
Like helping people be in tune with their emotions, helping be in tune with how to communicate with people, because you get these basic skills down packed, your environment in the school will change. You're going to have students that are going to be more comfortable opening up, not going to feel ashamed about speaking their mind. Like,
right.
As an educator, one of the things that limits the classroom experience is shame and this feeling of like, I don't feel confident in the material that I skimmed through the night before or that I may have read or whatever it is. I just don't feel comfortable sharing you something that I know, or even comfortable telling you that I don't know. And it's making that environment safe for them to be able to say like, you know what, I don't get it. I tell them all the time, tell me if you don't understand it. I'm going to repeat it anyway and say it a different way because I'm just going to assume you don't get it anyway. But let me know, because it's not hurting my ego as a teacher if you say that I'm not doing my job effectively. But what I've learned is that a lot of students have had those experiences where they felt like the professor and the educator can't talk to them because it's like their ego's being shot when you tell them that and they're the expert. And I'm like, bro, I'm okay with, I love being wrong because at the end of the day, I'm gonna end up being right. So, you know, correct me if I need to, if you need to, if there's something that I don't know, if I'm not being effective in a particular way, my goal is to be effective. So please help me do that.
Yeah.
I think what happens is a lot of these personal experiences in these kids' lives have really conditioned them to feel uncomfortable with opening up to people and being open and honest with themselves about certain things. And then they go home and deal with these issues at home regarding grades or about their academic performance. And it's kind of drilling back into their head, into kids' heads. Don't talk about things that are of importance to you. Don't speak your mind about certain things. And then when you go back in the classroom, you're now doing the same exact thing. You're shutting down the classroom because you don't want to speak up because of the same stuff that happened at home. So that's something I've noticed a lot.
I'm curious how you'll relate to this. So I teach at 2 different universities in the grad programs. So I'm teaching students who are about to go out in the world and be therapists. And one university is in person, one university is online. And the online university tends to attract more people of color from all sorts of socioeconomic statuses. And one thing that I have had a really hard time with as a professor is students coming into my class who weren't prepared ahead of time because they didn't have a teacher like you, right? Like actually teaching these things along the way. And then I am in the position of giving them bad grades for the first time, some of them. That's the feedback I seem to be getting. And I hold very, very dear our profession. And I want to make sure that people who are going into the profession are adequate and competent. And
exactly.
It's been so hard for me because, you know, the stories are so wildly different. But there was one student who she wasn't showing up. She was, you know, pushing against everything. And turns out she was homeless the whole time. But this school is online. So I didn't even know how she was making that meet. But again,
Jesus,
she didn't tell me. Right?
Yeah.
She didn't tell me. And then there are other students who it's clear no one ever taught them how to write an academic paper, which, first of all, why do we need to write that way? Like that's trauma in and of itself.
But that's very traumatic.
Right? But I'm supposed to hold the students to these standards. And it's just, I do not know how to reconcile that and hold all the trauma that these students have gone through and make sure that they're prepared to go out and be therapists.
Right. It's tough because you're dealing with a system in itself that also puts a certain expectation and pressure on you to do your job a certain way. And, you know, believe me, man, at this point, you may have done it anyway, but I'll be honest and say at this point in certain things, working with certain students and their experiences, I just let that ride. Like, look, if I had a student that was homeless and the fact that you even found a way to even do something in the classroom, yo, you got to give credit to that. You know what I mean? Like that is an amazing, again, a sign of resiliency. So it's one of those things I take in consideration because now what you're showing me in this state, in this situation, is that you're working through this traumatic experience to try to have a better outcome.
Yeah.
And now as an educator, it's like, all right, damn, man, do I follow these guidelines or am I working with someone that clearly is putting himself in a position to get to where, as an educator, I want them to be, which is competent, understanding, and be able to be like in tune with who they are. So, you know, that's important. But also, I did want to mention, like, I don't know many people are going to open up and just say, hey, I'm homeless, you know, just let you know off rip. You know, I think there's a lot of, in itself, like, not even just shame, just a lot of, oh man, just a lot of emotional baggage that comes with that. Because who knows what the life was like beforehand. Right. But for you to have, you know, so, gosh, man, I just feel like it's a very, very annoying trickle down effect that we have, that we have here.
Yes,
and
exactly.
That trickle down effect, I think, like I said before, feeds into these previous experiences of like trauma that these kids are having, because now we're caught in this catch-22 of, can I be this? Do I have to be this enforcing professor or educator? Do I have to be this empathetic, caring one? What's the fine line between that?
Exactly.
Am I enabling?
Exactly. Right.
You know what I mean? And you navigate that, because some of these kids, boy, having a B on an assignment or not doing good is like a shock to them. And I think, and again, these things are a shock to your identity because you probably went through a school system or through an experience in school. And the tricks of the trade is you bug a teacher long enough, they probably change your grade. You get your mom and dad involved, they probably change your grade. You have some sob story that probably never happened or happened years ago, but you find a way to make it work now in your life, change your grade. You know what I mean? Like, There's more effort into the idea of getting a grade to look the way you want it to than actually doing the work to get the grade.
Exactly.
So
Right.
you already know.
Yeah.
And so it's one of the things I tell them at the beginning is, guys, I don't care about your grades. I care about you guys as people. What you
Exactly.
do to get the grade is on you. My class policy is fairly easy when it comes to you submitting something. But hey, look, if the deadline is Tuesday and I give you 5 days later to submit it to get some credit, and you submit it 6 days later, you're not going to get any credit for it. But what I've noticed though, when we think about the idea of like this, the idea of like trauma in itself, right? And kind of tying this back in, is that a lot of parents put these.
I saw that eye roll.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
A lot of parents put a lot of pressure on these kids and create expectations for them to have that they themselves probably don't want. And when they find themselves feeling like they're not meeting those expectations, they're now feeling the sense of shame and guilt that come with what now seems to them as failure. But in reality, you just have to call a spade and just say, hey, look, I didn't learn the material. I wasn't paying attention in class. I wasn't where I needed to be to get to where I want to be. How can I go about doing it the right way, right? And as educators, it's kind of like breaking away these ties that these parents have over the kids and getting them to feel a little more comfortable with the fact that failure is a part of this journey of growth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, it's okay to say that I don't know this, because now we can commit the time to learn it, right?
Right.
And that to me is very interesting, because I always think about like this part of NARM that always like stands out to me, which is like the things that we want to have, the closer we get to it, we then like do all the stuff, basically sabotage ourselves.
Yep.
And I think about like as a student, when I ask these kids, okay, so this is one thing I actually do in class that I learned working at Family First with NARM stuff. And I had them like write down their ideal self and like all the things that they thought was an ideal person that they wanted to be, the student and all that cool stuff. And I was like, all right, man, on the other side of the paper, write down the things you're actually doing. And the things that, and boy, was that
challenge.
Oh boy, that was humbling. That was super. And I'll walk around, I'll see some of the kids say, hey, I want to be a psych major. I want to be a therapist. And on the other side, the things that they're doing well. And they're like, honestly, I procrastinate. I don't read the material. I still have anger issues. Like they get really deep with it. And I kind of just left the class like that, actually. Kind of just let them sit with it. But what it did, though, is allows them to see, like, this is who you really want to be for yourself. It's not who you want to be for your family. It's not necessarily who you want to be for what society tells you. This is like your authentic self, right? And now it's kind of exploring, like, the things that you're doing or not doing to get there. What's actually stopping you from doing it? Like, what's getting in the way of that? All right. Then we could tie it back to say it's your parents that are, getting on your nerves or putting all this pressure in. But now let's tie it into the things that you are doing, like really trying to like educate kids now about like self-agency. That's actually one thing I'm writing about for next school year. So
yeah, how do you explain agency to your students?
Oh boy, I'm actually working on that, man. I was actually going to bug Mike about some articles and Brad about some articles about that, because I really wanted to incorporate this part of NARM into the school that I'm working at, because agency is so important in so many different ways, right? It's the idea of taking this personal initiative to do something for yourself, to be in the place that you want to be in. And you can only imagine, and I'm sure you know, how empowering that is for anybody to be able to say that I'm going to do this for me. And like, I'm taking ownership of like this process, right? Taking full control of it. And I'm like riding this ship the way I want to ride it. And then you're seeing the results of it. That's so empowering to see that, like, okay, I am reading the book. I am asking these questions. I'm being honest with myself and say, you know what, professor, I have no freaking clue what you're talking about right now.
Yeah.
And then trusting that you're going to respond and educate me, right? And knowing that all of that, the discomfort, the feeling of potential embarrassment, whatever it is that you have that might have stopped you before, all of that is actually getting you closer to this idea of being the best therapist or that best student that you saw yourself as. And like, once you realize that that's a part of the journey, oh my gosh, I think it's just a huge weight off your shoulders. I don't know. And that's what I want for my kids. So what I'm thinking of as I actually talk to you more about it is talking about this part actually, which is being authentic, finding out what that really even looks like for you right now, and finding out the things that are stopping you from being the best version of yourself, either in the classroom or outside of the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
I
I
probably
love
have to
it.
write more, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear about it.
Yes.
Another question that came to mind as we're talking about all of this. So, post-traumatic growth. I've been thinking about the term post-traumatic growth in terms of people who are in communities where the trauma never stops, like communities of color.
Yeah.
So, I'm curious if you have musings on that.
Oh boy. Oh man, that's tough. All right. First off, we have to acknowledge that there are systems in place that do not work in favor for us. And I say us, I say Black folks, people of color, and low income communities. When you look at redlining, like these historical things have been in place, right? You're growing up in these environments that are repeating these traumatic experiences. And not only that, unfortunately, you're also like, one of the things I learned was vicarious trauma too. And how these experiences not only are impacting people in your community, in your area, but also nationwide, like people that you may not have seen before, but now you can relate to. And it's just as traumatic because now you're saying to yourself, man, I saw someone unarmed get shot in, Missouri, and I'm out here in Miami, and who's to say I'm not next, right? Now, how you engage or how you interact as a person, how you function, all those things are now impacted by that experience. So the way I look at it as this repeated cycle of trauma, I think it really is connected to the system itself. If you think about like the school to prison pipeline, where for those that aren't familiar with it, right, the school to prison pipeline basically is a system in which young boys, primarily young boys of color, are more than likely to go into prison compared to those that are not. It's usually for kids that are in low income communities and communities that don't have a lot of resources and communities that have poor education systems. We tell our kids all the time, or as often as we can, about how some prisons function, right? How some prisons in itself are making money off of people who are in jail, private prisons.
Yep.
So some people are just filtered through that system, going straight from middle school to high school and then into prison because of this industrial prison complex. So what we try to educate them on is the role that they play right now as young 8th graders or 7th graders and middle school students, and being aware that you guys have been dealt at least 1 or 2 strikes. That's what we tell them. They know. When you ask them in the crowd, when you ask them in class, we tell you, hey, what's your first strike? They'll say, my skin tone, my skin color, right? But it's real because they have to know that. It's sad that I have to, it's sad that it's a thing to talk about, but it's the reality of it. So now you are navigating not only a tough environment, but also navigating through a culture and a system that has told you over and over again that you are either less than or that you have to work twice as hard to get to where others are. All these things are now putting this pressure on you to feel like you can even just be just enough. And some people unfortunately fall through the wayside, and that's how they end up in prison or end up somewhere else. And then you have those that make it out. But the system in itself needs to shift in order for people to feel comfortable about who they are as individuals. Because right now, what the system in itself is telling people, is communicating to people, is that you are not good enough.
Right.
And that in itself is reinforcing a lot of thinking, a lot of the behaviors that occur in these environments, in these communities, and makes it very hard for us to get out of that because we don't have enough individuals that are out there telling us otherwise or showing us otherwise. When they talk about it in NARM, like anger in itself is like a means of like communicating like unmet needs, right?
Yeah.
And when I talk to my kids and they're angry, they're punching holes in walls or like they're just mad at the world, I look around in the environment and I'm like, dog, I get it.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like, I'll be pissed off too. I was there. I get it. Thinking about it like this really just reminds me how much work we have to do on the back end to really make the environment that we need to have for these kids to get to where they should be, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So,
well, are there any particular stories either of success or struggle that you think of in terms of your work?
Yeah. So at the end of summer camp, we take them all to Universal Orlando, and some of these kids have never been outside of the neighborhood or their block. So it's beautiful to see them say like, yo, like, this is what, like, I'm like, bro, this is Orlando, dog. I mean, okay, cool. I'm happy that
nothing fancy here.
Right. I'm happy that you're happy, man. So, but I'm glad that you're seeing the world and more of the world that honestly, man, this can be yours. Like, you can be out here doing this too when you want to with your family, having fun. We just got to chip away at some other things that are going on right now in school and how you're conducting yourself, right? So all that stuff to say, like, I had a kid, the same kid I was talking about earlier, one of the kids I'm really close with. Man, if I tell you, there's one day I wish I was, oh boy. Anyway, I want to go upside that boy's head. He stole something at a Universal and lied to me. And lied to me. And I knew he was lying. In my head, I was like, bro, just tell me the truth.
Right.
I was like, I drive you home. Like, you're in my car. If I tell you to go get something out my whip, you get it. I never have to worry about you doing anything extra, but I know you're lying. And after an hour of me sitting there staring at him and kind of just like repeating the stuff that he's saying, when stuff doesn't make sense, you kind of just have to repeat it.
That's a brilliant technique. I love it. Just keep saying it back. Oh, okay. Yeah. You didn't steal from me. Okay.
Right. Yeah. Because I was like, you didn't have. So here's the thing. He didn't have money to get the necklace that he stole. So he made it seem like he got money from other people. And all the other kids were like, no, bro, I'm broke. I didn't give him the damn dime. So he said, look, I want to apologize first off. And he said, it's been very hard for me because you and like the other guys here have been like the only male role models I've had. And it's hard for me to try to go and do something different when all I know or all I've been exposed to is like this means of survival, of like getting things. And it was important for me to have that conversation, for him to share that with me.
Yeah.
That was the part that I really cared about the most. The lying stuff and all that kind of stuff, I get. You were lying. You're doing everything right now to save face and survive right now. Like, all right, this is a function. So let me not take that out. I take it for what it is. But the fact that you changed up and said, hey, this is what this situation really is, became honest with me and left it very open about whatever the consequences were. But at least in that process, you said to yourself, look, whatever happens, I'm going to let you know that this is the reason. This is the real reason why. I'm going to put that out there for you to take, right? And by him saying that, that was it for me. There was no need to punish. There was no need to really hit him with the hammer. I already hit him with the confusion for an hour. You know what I mean? So like there wasn't any need for me there wasn't no sob story that I had to give him or no life lesson story I need to tell him after that. That was a conversation that said, you know what, man, I'm now aware of the impact of my environment. I'm now aware about the things that I had to learn growing up in order to survive in this environment has now, unfortunately, impacted people I care for and has now shown me that this isn't the route that I need to take because I have people out here that want me to do better and are showing me how to do better. So for me, I just look at it as relapse. You know what I mean? You had a relapse in your behavior. To be honest, I would have never thought it, but I'm not surprised, especially with the stories that you told me. So for it to happen and for you to finally open up and just tell me about it, dog, we can sit down and have a conversation about life and just chill and keep it moving. You know what I mean? It's a freeing conversation to have when you're okay with being vulnerable. And that's what I wanted to show him. It's like once you can get past this state of like shame and guilt about what you're doing and trust that the other person is going to be there to support you, that's a healthy connection. But then also you just getting to a space where you're like, I'm okay with opening up and acknowledging the things that have hurt me and that have hurt others, right? To be able to say that for yourself, to me, is just as big, probably even bigger. And that's honestly the whole thing that was processing in my head was you're working through the shame and guilt by now acknowledging what it actually looks like. You're not happy about the actions that you've taken and you've explained why in context. And I'm not going to add on to that shame. You know, it's now time to show you this love and be consistent in that. And that's the other part of this whole thing is a lot of them haven't received this consistent connection. This consistent idea of like, I'm aware of what's going on with you emotionally and I'm going to tend to it. They usually get the complete opposite. So by me being consistent in that, despite like them doing things naturally, right? Like I said, the things that we do for the sense of survival. These are natural patterns. The things that when they naturally pop off or they say something stupid or they do something they're clearly not supposed to do and always get ticked off. These are all natural things that they do. But I would enable that if I fell into the same pattern that their parents did, that their teachers did by yelling at them and all that kind of stuff. And I say, guys, I'm not falling into that trap because that trap is safe for you. And I said, look, I'm too old for this. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to be blunt, but I'm also going to show you love and support and be consistent in that because you guys need to see that. Now, if I pop off and I cuss you out, it's still love. You know what I'm saying?
Right? Yeah.
Like you know where it's coming from because you know who's saying it. But I'm not changing who I am. I'm not changing myself in a way that is normal to you because, again, I have to be different to make sure that you learn to be different. So that's really kind of like what that experience has taught me. I know I shared a story, then I kind of brought it back to like a bigger thing that I experienced. But
that's great.
That's one of the things that I can say has been a highlight with this program. So I did do like a NARM 101 one day. And I thought that was really cool because we just went over survival styles. That really was it. I didn't take it any further. I'm not no Heller. So I am not going to do that. But I would definitely keep it as like basic as possible. Just a random story. Like for my study habits, I usually write down like a lot of the things that NARM says as far as like the personal narratives that you say to yourself regarding survival styles. And that's really what I posted on the board. I was like, these are the things that you say to yourself.
Oh, wow.
So y'all just look at it and let me know which one of the things. And they're like, oh, you know, I can see a little bit of connection, a little bit of attunement here. I see that. So I'm like, all right, cool. And that was really it. Like, I just really wanted to introduce them to like an idea, right? Introduce them to NARM and then introduce them to what their personalities or what their patterns look like and put a name to it, put some words to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think it's always cool to add like, it's information, man. It's cool for them to go home and say, Mom, you're not connecting with me or whatever.
Yeah.
So I thought that was one of my personal highlights, I think, because they really took it in. And then I'm also very Bohemian. So like I incorporate a lot of like genograms. So I did a family tree with them and talked about how like these generational patterns work. And they started talking about these traumatic patterns and how that seeps into them, right? So let's say like dad has a history of like anger, and that stemmed from these experiences that happened in his life growing up. And now those experiences are now trickled into his relationship with mom. And now my young boy is now learning that in order to get what I want, I need to react the way dad does, right? So that in itself is teaching, I think, these experiences that are now, unfortunately, I think even that is traumatic too, right? Like you're learning about a pattern in a lifestyle that, again, is unfortunately like damaging to who you are in your identity and also preventing you from getting to where you want to be and who you want to be as a person. And hearing my kids like actually acknowledge that and just name that stuff to me, I thought was amazing. For them to say like, oh, damn, my dad really had a temper. And I was like, so how would you describe yourself? He was like, damn, I got a temper. Like, you know, and I was like, and then he'll just sit there and be like, because I remember I see my dad and how he reacts. And I was like, well, do you want to be like that? And he was like, nah, I don't. And hearing that, I think to me is like I don't know, I take my wins here and there. I take that as well.
That's where agency arises. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I'm just really struck by, you said at the beginning you really wanted to explore vulnerability in terms of the population that you work with, and the way that I hear you demonstrating vulnerability as a model and then helping kind of just gently open up space for it to come out with your students and these young men that you work with. It's just incredible. Your work is wonderful.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I think, like I said, it's more work needs to be done.
Always.
But I think what's important is everyone needs to be aware of what's going on in our communities as a whole, right? Like as a whole. So in every community that has privilege, you have to assume that there's communities that around there that doesn't, plain and simple. And you have to task yourself and say, okay, how can I get those communities and those people that aren't receiving what I'm receiving? How can I get them to get to where I'm at right now? And even more importantly, ask yourself, like, why am I uncomfortable even having that personal conversation about doing it? Like, why do I feel uncomfortable having the idea of like bringing someone into my space, into my environment, or into my social status, or, you know what I mean? Like, right. Is that threatening to me and to my identity? Is that threatening to what I consider as power and authority? How are you defining power and authority? Right? Why is that in itself even important? So, it's a lot, but I think that we have to do our due diligence to continue to have these conversations that we're having here, continue to unpack a lot of the things that are going on in our communities that we may be aware of, but also the things that we actually don't feel comfortable talking about.
Yeah.
And just because you may not be Black or be in the lower income community or whatever it is, does not mean that you cannot be an advocate. It does not mean that you cannot be knowledgeable. It does not mean that you cannot connect, right? So when we think about these ideas of survival styles, and just when I think about that, just taking it down at its root, and just the idea of just being connected to someone, you have to really task yourself to explore, like, why am I only connected to certain people? Why do I feel uncomfortable, or what's stopping me from being connected to these experiences? Because now if I am connected to these people and these experiences in a different way, what does that mean about me? Or what does that mean about my identity or my privilege, right? And that's the threatening part, is like, it might expose things that you don't want to be exposed to right now. But we got to do it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this amazing interview. This has just been wonderful.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for joining us for today's episode. If you want to learn more, you can check out the show notes or visit us at www.narmtraining.com/transformingtrauma. The Transforming Trauma podcast is brought to you by the NARM Training Institute. NARM practitioner trainings for mental health professionals are offered across North America and internationally. Please join us starting in June for our online NARM training in learning how to transform trauma. This online NARM basics training is available for professionals working with clients or populations dealing with complex trauma. NARM provides a relational approach to addressing the current COVID pandemic and tools to support healing in the aftermath of this collective trauma. Join us for this Level 1 NARM training to become a NARM-informed professional. For more information and to apply, please visit at www.narmtraining.com/online-basics. Thanks to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for producing and editing, to Tori Essex for our album art, and to Brad Kammer for the creation of this podcast. We really look forward to building community and connection with you and changing the world by transforming trauma.